Hi, you're watching The Intersection.
Halloween edition. This is stupid.
Hello, you're watching The Intersection where faith, life, and culture meet. My name is Eric Targe.
And I'm Justin May, and joining us is Jocelyn Carter, Associate Professor of Psychology from DePaul University in Chicago. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you. Good to be back.
You're joining us on an exciting day. This is our Halloween edition, which just means that we're releasing this video on the same week as Halloween. And the focus of this one is fear. So we're going to be talking about the emotion of fear and how do we, as emotional creatures, kind of navigate what fear is. So all of us have fear.
Yeah. Is fear actually an emotion, Jocelyn?
It is.
Yeah!
Fear is an emotion.
All right.
One of our basic...
Were you just afraid that we might hit you in the face?
No.
Okay, good.
I completely trusted you. Yeah, it's one of our most basic emotions. And it's really interesting to think about the emotion of fear. We experience it in our bodies with like a heartbeat really fast, sweaty palms, discomfort in our stomachs. But we also worry. So that's the cognitive part that we like think what's going to happen. This could be really bad. And then our whole system is ready to respond to some danger that we perceive in the environment. So this is how people can do things that they've never been able to do, run faster than ever before, lift cars off of their children who are trapped underneath, because our whole body is geared to help us survive in the face of threat. And that's where fear and anxiety come from.
Well, I mean, some of those things that you just described are really cool and kind of hit on perhaps why fear is not necessarily a bad emotion. It could actually be a good thing that motivates us to do good things. Like, obviously, Justin was fearful that his water or whatever that was, that condensation was going to ruin my book.
Yeah, I kind of knocked the cup over a little bit with the high five. I got a little over enthusiastic.
Oh, did ya?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
But that fear motivated you to save my book.
I'm trying, man. Books are cool. We like books.
We do like books. We are nerds here.
We are. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, so launching into fear. I mean, one of the things that I have a bunch of scriptures written down because fear comes up in the Bible a whole lot.
Yeah.
And one common theme that I'm seeing is like a proper fear of God can be very useful for kind of contextualizing some of these fears and putting other fears in their place. From a psychological perspective, kind of like how you're not talking to a believer, you're not talking to a Christian, how do you go about helping manage fear?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of managing fear, I would say, like we already said, fear is it can be healthy. It can alert us to something that needs to change or something that we need to do. But when it becomes a problem, when it keeps us from, for example, spending time with family because we're afraid to leave the house. When it gets in the way of your life, that's sort of what psychologists would consider it to be a fear, when it's impairing. And if that is what comes up, then we have, as psychologists, lots of great, we call them evidence-based theories for doing that, which basically mean that we are working with someone to understand exactly what's most fearful. So someone will say, they're afraid of flying. You have to dig in and see well, what is it actually that you're afraid of? Is it you're afraid that this is going to happen? I don't want to give people lots of ideas about things that they're afraid of, but maybe it's being in the tight quarters. Maybe it's not so much about the airplane. So you've got to understand what that fear is about. And then if you know sort of what's the worst thing about flying, then working up to in baby steps, small steps, becoming more comfortable each step of the way, but not thinking okay, well, I'm afraid of flying, so the thing to do right now is book a 24-hour flight to Australia. So like you don't want to go
Don't go to the
too far
extreme.
with that. You're going to work on it in a process. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I know when we talked about this, one of the biggest things you said when we're dealing with fear, the first thing we need to do is we need to lean in to our fear, not allow our fear to conquer us or let it be something that we're just constantly avoiding. So how would you recommend that we actually help others to lean in a non-overwhelming way, or even help ourselves to lean into fear? Because Scripture tells us we're not supposed to fear a lot of things, right? We're not supposed to fear man. We are supposed to fear God. It's the fear of God that's the beginning of knowledge, and we're supposed to fear God who can destroy both body and soul when it comes to that. It's like, but how do we face those ungodly fears? How do we lean into them tangibly?
Yeah, I think, so a couple of things. One, when we are trying to lean into fears, I think just acknowledging that fears are not an excuse for not doing things. So you can be afraid of going to school on the first day, of school-age kids, and still go. So a lot of times that emotion or that feeling of fear means you're not going to do something. And so I think holding that tension of I can be fearful and still move forward with my life. It's not a barrier. There doesn't have to be a barrier or an excuse is important. And then I always think if we as people who want to support others who have fears, talking about our own fears, so much of what we do as humans is we hide our fears. So we act like things are okay or things don't make us nervous, and then we sort of set the stage for other people not being able to tell us the things that we're scared of. So just being like a human that's open about that makes it okay for others to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think we would say like some fears are good. Like we should fear certain things and we should not move toward them.
Right.
But there are a lot of fears that are kind of either like wrong, we shouldn't fear them, or they're in some ways neutral. And it's like we need to get over them. Like I know a lot of people who are afraid to ask that person out on a date, or they're afraid to actually go on the date. So if you have someone that's constantly has that social anxiety and that fear, what would you counsel them? How would you counsel them to lean in, as you've said?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is thinking about sort of, again, like small steps. So maybe they don't want to ask the person out on the date, but maybe they could make sure to say hi to them or meet someone new. I think the buddy system is always really good. So most of us feel better if we have a friend who's a safe person that can remind us, like, this is important. Like, you're going to go for it. Like, I believe in you. So, a safe person can be really helpful too. And then thinking about like, okay, well, what's the worst that could happen here? So the worst that could happen, if you ask someone on a date, I guess it would be that they said no, and you would still be okay. It would be a little bit painful, but it's not the end of the world.
So you're talking about the play it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked before. You were saying, hey, two things to really overcome fear were lean in, and then play out. And that play out made me think of that show, This Is Us. Have you seen This Is Us, Justin?
I have not.
What?
I know.
Dude, you gotta watch it. Jocelyn, you've seen This Is Us.
I love This Is Us. I do.
This Is Us. So
I love everything about
probably
it.
one of the most emotionally manipulative shows on
true.
television. I cry, and I'm talking like ugly cry. I didn't cry at my own wedding. And I cried during This Is Us. I ugly cried during This Is Us. I don't know why. But one of the things that they do is they have this little played out game that's kind of called Worst Case Scenario, where they talk and they go back and forth, the husband and wife, Randall and Beth, of course. See, we're into this. And they keep going on like, oh, what is the worst thing that could happen? And you, I guess my fear with that is that you spiral. But you would actually say that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing, and
Why?
especially if you can make a game out of it and do it sort of playfully, because it takes the power away from the fear. So psychologists have a word for that called catastrophizing. So it's thinking about the worst possible.
That sounds so bad, catastrophizing.
Well, right, it does, but that's sometimes what our minds are doing in the background without us actually being aware of it. So if you can make it into a game with yourself or with a friend and get those fears out, then it helps, I think, bring awareness that like the odds of any of these things actually happening are very small, and it takes away the power and like the sting and the heaviness of what that fear is. And you're like, actually, it helps you realize like, okay, well, that's very unlikely, but even if that were it to be the outcome, I would be okay.
Huh. That's really cool. It makes so much sense, and it has me thinking. I know this is so it's off. We didn't talk about this before, but it really makes me think. I was reading Habakkuk, been going through that for my devotions.
Bible brag.
I was going to say
And-
good name drop.
Huh?
Good. I was just reading Habakkuk and it just came to
Going
mind.
through the Bible, stop. But Habakkuk 3, it made me bring that to mind. So in Habakkuk 3, verse 17, it says, "Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will take joy in the God of my salvation." And I just think it's a really cool passage right there in Habakkuk, because I think that's what it's doing, and I didn't realize that. I was reading this yesterday, and I didn't realize that in some sense that's catastrophizing, because that didn't
worst.
happen yet. But there's this idea of like, hey, if all these things happen, I can still rejoice. Yeah, that's really cool. I'm thankful for that term. I'm going to go back to my Bible right now and write catastrophizing in the margin.
Catastrophizing.
And that makes me think too, like there's a verse I think that gets tossed in the face of people who are struggling with fear, and I think it can oftentimes be used kind of oppressively, but it's not intended to be. In 1 John 4, 18 and 19, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us." And I think that gets thrown in the face oftentimes with people like, well, if you were saved, if you really knew Jesus, you wouldn't have fear. But I think that that's actually very aspirational, right? That like we are not yet perfected, but we can look forward to a time when we will no longer have those fears. And we can look to Christ as the one who has delivered us from every reason to fear, and not, don't use it as a tool to beat each other over the head with like, well, hey, quit being afraid, dummy. But, look to
Is that what
Christ.
people have told you?
I get dummy a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
I get dummy a lot. But, it's the thing, the goal we're moving towards, rather than being kind of stuck in that fear where we are right now.
That's good.
Well, Jocelyn, I know that Justin and I were talking before how both of us kind of have some family members that struggle with different types of fear. And I guess, these two things are really helpful. Lean in, don't avoid, play it out, actually having that buddy that you're catastrophizing with, which again is so counterintuitive. But how do we help I can tell someone lean in, play out, but when they have a big fear, like one of the things that we talked about earlier before we started this shooting was maybe you've seen that crazy uncle. I think I had that crazy uncle that picked me up and threw me into the pool because I feared swimming or feared drowning in the deep end. But maybe that's not the best way. How do we actually help our friends and our family members or our loved ones to kind of cope with fear?
Yeah.
Especially as Christians.
Yeah, please don't throw people into water. That's not good to do.
That
Just
can
in
scar
case
them,
anyone,
right?
in case anyone,
And I'm not a strong
knows. But I think that in our culture today, I don't know if it's always been this way. People really aren't open about what their fears are. So I think for us, I always think about for fear. The antidote is really like modeling and seeing people overcoming their fear. So even in small ways of letting someone know like, oh, well, I'm actually really nervous about this. I think sometimes talking to students who are often scared of public speaking, they're like, that public speaking is like the number one fear that people have. And normalizing that and like, well, of course, because it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but we can do things that are hard and uncomfortable, and they ultimately they make us stronger and they make us better. So I think that can be encouraging for them. I think it's also helpful if someone is feeling fearful about something. Of course, it depends on what it is, but just telling them like, I'll be with you. And I think in the Bible, there's lots of examples of people coming alongside, encouraging, supporting, not shaming, not making fun of people, and it can be seen as a weakness, but it's also but it's also not. It's just it's normal. So
Yeah.
making it okay, I think, to
Is the
talk
biggest thing.
about.
Yeah.
I think it's good.
I know I'm convicted because I've been making fun of Eric a lot, and I feel bad about it.
Apology coming.
Eventually, when the cameras are done, I think we've about covered it, right? Like I think we've got. I'm sorry.
I
shouldn't have made.
Thank you. There. That's all I needed. All I
I'm
needed was an
sorry.
apology.
Apology.
An
Yeah.
apology. Now normalize me.
Okay, you're normal.
Stop. Jocelyn, thank you so much for being
Yes.
a part of
Welcome.
this. We so appreciate it and all your help on fear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching The Intersection. If you liked this video, press like on the video. It's that little thumbs up or the heart on Instagram. And also, please subscribe to this video and turn on notifications so that you can get tuned in to our next series, which will be starting very soon. Thanks again for watching.
Yeah, and feel free to put any rando conspiracy theory comments in the comment section. Eric loves reading those.
I do.
Thank
I
you.
do. I love
Yeah.
that oatmeal. What is that?
Under
Quaker?
instead
The
of
Undertaker.
Undertaker.
Wait, who's the dude?
That's the Quaker.
The Undertaker.
The
It's the
Quaker
the
oat
Undertaker.
Oh, that's
thing.
the under. See, I don't know
With
anything about wrestling.
No, it's okay.
I just love that you have a Quaker Oats guy. Cool.
But he's also the Undertaker.
But he's also, yeah.
I like
it
that
works.
you did know.
Yeah,
You
I
follow
use
wrestling?
no, but I use the context clues
Oh,
from.
I don't do
Brains.
context.